Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Advanced Mortgage Solutions podcast. This is a podcast that assists people with their property journey. Whether you're a first-home buyer or a seasoned investor, we cover all topics. I'm Joel Sadler, and our mortgage expert today is Scott Miller, owner and founder of Advanced Mortgage Solutions. Scott's been a property investor for over 20 years now, and his professional background includes logistics, management, and finance. So the technical knowledge, along with his real-world experience and registered mortgage advisor license, basically gives us amazing insights and knowledge in terms of the mortgage space, the investing space, and property buying space. Right, so today's episode discusses Scott's experience with property investing. I think it's something a lot of people think about or are told they should do. But Scott, we'd love to hear a bit from your side of things, your personal experience with property investing. So we'll start off with what attracted you to property investing?
Way back in the day, I was living in the UK, and the exchange rate was very favourable back there, where you could send some money home after working quite hard in the UK. And when I came back to New Zealand to live in 2006, had a bit of a nest egg, enough to get me into my first home, and then I'd always had an interest in property. So going into the rental space, it was just the next logical thing for me. I was just starting out as a mortgage advisor as well, so they sort of did overlap in the information for me to sort of make, really good decisions around what I was doing. I made a few mistakes, as you do when you're going out there, but in general, I didn't know a lot about stocks and bonds. There was no such thing as crypto way back then, of course, but and it all seemed a bit too technical and sort of a whim of the market type of atmosphere with stocks and bonds. And I liked something that was a little bit more stable. And I always found that, property has an intrinsic value to it, particularly land. And you'll find generally a house goes up in its value, not because of the house itself that's on the land, it's the land that's underneath it that increases. And as such, found that a much safer kind of investment. And again, I suppose there's my my proviso is I'm probably a little bit biased towards property because of the type of work I do, but also because it's just over the years, it's really served me well, really served me well. Yeah.
It's interesting to hear your attraction to the different types of, or to that investing as opposed to some of the other type of things out there. So how did you get started in property investing? What was your first leap?
When I very first started, I wasn't a broker myself. It was a broker that I was with, and he introduced me to some of the things. And it's actually that same broker that eventually got me into becoming a mortgage advisor as such. So there's a wee story there as well. But look, as it was with most people, it's a little thing I've coined, and it means that the property becomes an accidental rental. I say that because it rhymes and it sounds quite cool. But what that means is that typically you tended to buy the house initially to live in, but then you used that particular house to puddle jump into something bigger or better or nicer or further up the scale of, the property sort of quality and those sorts of things. And that's where the accidental rental sort of comes in. It wasn't really intended to be a rental, but it, just by chance of using the equity in that property to go and buy yourself something nicer, it became a rental that way. And that's how it started. I made sure I went out and got some advice from an accountant to make sure that I was purchasing under the right structures and things like that, which I highly recommend people to do. Being down the track now 20 years, I do see a lot of people have not, started out their journey under the right structure and have had to spend a lot of money to sort of unwind what they've got, only to wind it back up to exactly the same position, but under the right ownership structure. Maybe a company or a trust or something like that. Look, I was lucky enough to have the right people around me at the time, got the right advice and did the right thing. I will move on a little bit to say, some of the faux pas I did make is in the accidental rental, although the house was nice to live in, it didn't make the best rental in the world. And what I mean by that is, they were weatherboard houses, with say tin roofers. Roofs and things like that. So they turned out to be, on the maintenance side of things, quite a cost to bear compared to just the rental income that was coming in. So that changed over time. Obviously, I went out and then specifically bought houses because they were going to become a rental property. And that's just a completely different mindset to having an accidental rental. be added to your portfolio. Yeah.
So there's a couple of things I want to unpick there, which is really cool. So, because one of my questions later on was if someone's, just starting, out to buy their own home, but they have plans to move into the property investing, because not everyone just wants to buy their own home. They have plans, they have vision, they want to build a wealth plan like you've done. Tell us about that puddle jumping concept. That was quite powerful. And so how did you use your home to sort of puddle jump, as you said, into another property?
So, you've owned your house for a while now, and you've got used to that house. You've paid that house down just through your normal mortgage repayments, either aggressively or not. Capital growth has also had its way on your property, so it's now worth more than what you purchased it for. And all that means is that you own a larger portion of the house's value in what's called equity. And equity means the increase in the house's value compared to the mortgage. And then you can use that equity as deposit funds to go and buy yourself another property. And this is how most people on the accidental rental side of things come about, expanding their rental portfolio, because the more property they own, the more capital growth has an effect on their overall portfolio, which means that they have equity to go and buy another one. Now, there's some limitations, of course. There's loan-to-value ratio restrictions out there that are a little bit harder than when I first started. They're still achievable. And there's, of course, the inevitable income lock. And what I mean by that is that the way that a loan is assessed, it just comes to a point where your income plus the rental income of your portfolio no longer is quite high enough to afford the next, the next purchase. So you have to wait for either wage increases or, more equity or the rents to go up for you to then sneak out that next purchase in your rental portfolio. But after saying that, you don't have to buy, 5, 10, 15 houses, 2 or 3 is ample. When capital growth starts, which we're just at the start of another cusp of capital growth really beginning to kick off here in New Zealand, you'll find that, when the tide comes in, all the boats float. And if you own multiple properties, then all of those properties are going to go up in their value. And that's where the real sort of turbocharging of one's portfolio really takes effect.
Right. Interesting. So, the ultimate timing would be obviously like they talk about in stocks, and that is buy the dip and then ride the high, and then you're locking in your equity or capital
The only
gains.
problem with that, Joel, is that no one rings a bell to say, hey, we're at the bottom of the market. And then equally rings a bell when we're at the top of the market. It'd be so handy if someone would do that.
Yeah.
But look, as long as, if you're buying for yourself and it's your owner-occupied home, then there's no wrong time to buy, right? Because the chances are you're going to own that house for many years, and it just means the next property cycles will sort out any kind of shortfall that you had in deposit or whatever at the time. It's a little bit more picky and choosy if you're starting to grow your own portfolio, because you do want to start when really house prices are what you might call depressed or at their lows or, outside of the next property cycle. So then you can take advantage of that capital growth curve on the next property cycle. But like I said, no one rings a bell. So it's just trying to be as close to the bottom as you can is good enough,
Yeah. And tell us about the maintenance issues. So you talked about weatherboard and tin roofs and that not being ideal. If you're looking to make that step and buy a rental property, what would you be looking for now out of interest in terms of the maintenance?
Really good questions, like permanent materials. So brick and tile would be a great start. Other ones that a lot of people don't think about is, really low landscaping maintenance. Like as much as you will look after your own property, a renter will not look after your property. And things like gardens and, lawns and, just a lot of landscaping of any type, really. You'll just find that renters, although they may start off enthusiastic to look after that, will soon drift away, and it can become a cost that you have to pay for by getting, a gardener in or a person to mow your lawns, because they're just not doing it for you, and the place is looking a bit rough,
Right.
Basically, the younger the stock, the less likely you are to spend on maintenance. There comes a point, though, where the rental return won't cover the mortgage. I suppose let's take it to the extreme. there's not a lot of point buying $1 million rental because you're not going to get the rent to cover
Yeah.
the mortgage that is going to cost for $1 million rental. It would be much better to go out and buy two $500,000 houses, get 2 lots of rent, and it just means that rental yield will be more favourable across 2 houses than it would across the $1 million purchase. So I know that's not so much of a maintenance thing as you've just started off the conversation, but it ultimately blends into the overall, hey, I'm running a business here and my rentals are my business. So that business has to be seen to make some kind of sense dollar-wise.
100%. I had a friend of mine years ago, he was buying, and I don't think it was necessarily low maintenance stock, it was older properties, but somewhere way up in Te Awamutu way, and he was essentially buying them so cheap that the rent was actually, he was positively geared, so he was actually making $50 or something a week from the rent on top of after paying the mortgage. In your experience, have you seen, I mean, that's sort of like the holy grail. Is there much of that around that you ever come across?
A lot of people try and get around that by doing a room by room type of rental arrangement, so they're charging out the rooms by, the rent by rooms. Other people try and use, let's say, Airbnb, those types of things. The importance to understand there is that the banks, who ultimately have the money to buy these things, do not take those sorts of incomes into consideration. So they would expect to receive a standard rental appraisal, and they would do their assessment on that basis, not on a room-by-room basis and not on a Airbnb basis. Now, that just means that they're doing that under assessment. If you choose to do room-by-room or Airbnb at a later stage, that's sort of on you as such. As long as you're meeting your mortgage repayments, they're not going to get ultimately upset about that. But it is something to bear in mind that lenders are very conservative in the space of, okay, how do we prove income from that particular property? A standard rental appraisal, if someone's going to live there on a 1 year or a 2 year fixed contract, is the way that they would then assess that income.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then if you bought, say, a rental property that had a sleep out on it, that could be rented separately, a single room, with a compliant shower and toilet and that sort of thing. That would be, would the banks take 100%. That into account?
Look, if there's a legitimate income source, they'll take that into consideration. And a lot of investors do that very thing. Even if they have an existing property, you may find with the sort of more relaxed terms around building external sleep outs and things, more and more people are doing that to improve the rental yield of that particular property. Or if it's existing, just make sure that it's got the compliance and everything for it to be there, so you're not buying something that's defective. Then the lenders will very much look at that and not even blink an eye.
Interesting. Yeah. Brilliant. What would be your main sort of tip or takeaway to kind of sum up from today in terms of someone that's looking to get into the property market, but then also has that long-term plan to eventually buy some rentals as well?
Certainly be upfront with the mortgage advisor that they're talking to that is their long-term goal. Sometimes holding a bit of cash back from the initial purchase can be an advantage because you can use that for your second purchase. The other thing there is I'd highly recommend that you give your financial advisor the heads up that that's what you're looking to do, particularly if, say, you've owned the property for a couple of years now and you're not really sure where you stand in regards to using equity out of your property, those sorts of things. Because we can crunch the numbers in behind the scenes without the banks knowing and prepare ourselves. So by the time we want to approach the banks, we know the banks are going to look upon that application favourably. And then, as I sort of alluded to, is to get some advice from an accountant just around the right kind of vehicle to start your rental portfolio in. And that might change. I see it all the time. The older mum and dad that might only end up buying one rental alongside their owner-occupied property, usually there's not a lot of reason to open a company to own that under, or a trust or something along those lines. But if you're sort of a little younger and you want to build a portfolio over time, then you generally find that the accountant's advice is, look, let's do it under a company. It just means that then you can buy all of the subsequent properties under the same company, and it's set up in the right structure right from the start. And even if you have an accidental rental, as we've talked about, over the time of this particular podcast, you can just simply change the ownership by taking it from your personal names and refinance it under the company name there. So it's legitimately, again, under that company owned structure. Very easy, but expensive if you don't get it right from the start and have to unwind everything only to wind it up under the right structure. So yeah, that's an important one.
Yeah, because I imagine there's tax implications and all that sort of stuff with all of these, you see, around all the structuring
It's one
as
of
well.
the major attractions to investment properties is there's taxational benefits under what would be called investment debt. So we tend to push as much of your personal debt across to the investment side of things through an acquisition of the property, for example, and it just means that increases your tax efficiencies as much as you can and limits as much personal debt as you possibly can on your side of things, because there's simply no taxational benefits on personal debt. So look, we're sort of moving into the next level of sophistication at this stage, probably possibly a podcast for later on, but that's again where we go back to that initial discussion with your accountant to ensure that we're just doing the right thing for you, either in the short or long-term plan. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for today, Scott. For those that are listening, if you've got an accidental rental, you're looking to get on the property ladder with your first home, and or have plans to get that magical 2 to 3 plus rental properties, or you're even looking to add some rooms to your home, or those other ways of creating, income that the banks sleep out, that the banks will, approve, reach out to Scott. He's a wealth of knowledge, as you can tell. Scott and his team, as I mentioned earlier, have 400 plus 5-star reviews, awesome Reddit feedback, and they're here to offer you free advice. So Scott, if someone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
One is on the website. You'll find all of the advisor's details there. There's contact forms. There's even a little form that helps us get through the approval process a little bit more. There's first-time buyer guides, you name it, it's all there. So yeah, visit advancedmortgagesolutions.co.nz.
Thanks, Scott.
Very much.